Here we go. We're going to start a new series on research and data, and this is going to be one of those unrefined series in which I do not have a transcript. You'll hear a lot of ahs and ums and goofs and me going back to repeat something because I didn't like the way I said it the first time. But that's the way it is in a live class, so you can handle this watching a video as well, I'm sure. You might call it Statistics Unplugged. Actually, it's not even about statistics. The topic research and data is about how we collect data and how that leads to different types of conclusions. The way we collect data directly influences the type of conclusions we can reach. It's not the statistics that we do that determines what kind of conclusions we can make, but it's rather the way we collect the data. So even though this topic is not about statistics, it's intimately woven into statistics because we do statistics in order to be able to make statements about our research data. Well, how we collect the data determines what kind of statements we make. So what we're going to do is talk about different ways we can collect data and the different things that leads to in terms of what we can say about our statistical outcomes based upon the data we collect. So the takeaway message from this little introduction that I've made right now is that at the end of research and data, I want you to realize that when you create a research report, that your conclusions are going to, yes, rely on statistical outcomes, but they're also going to be heavily influenced by how the data were collected. And so knowing how the data were collected, rather than just taking a bunch of data and analyzing them, knowing how the data were collected is going to be crucial to the kinds of conclusions you make. Statisticians have a saying, garbage in, garbage out. And in fact, if you do the best statistical analysis in the world on data that were not collected very well, then you cannot make very many claims, if any at all, even though you did great statistical analysis. Okay, so that's what I'm hoping that you'll see. So let's start by talking about the concept of the population. Many research questions are asked about a group. This is often implied rather than specified. So for instance, if I want to know if a holistic approach to teaching reading leads to greater comprehension with beginning readers than a phonetics approach, that research question, does holistic instruction of reading lead to greater comprehension with beginning readers than a phonetic approach, that research question has an implied group that the question is about. Who would it be? It would be anyone who's learning to read, correct? So even though we do not specify a group, there is one there, and we call this group the population. Research questions are asked about a group, even though that group is often implied. The group that is implied is called the target population. That's the broad group we have in mind when we ask a research question. The entirety of the target population is usually literally inaccessible, or it can be practically inaccessible. If I'm asking a question about instruction of beginning readers, that would be all beginning readers, and not just those that are beginning to read now. It would imply beginning readers 5 years from now, 10 years from now, individuals who are not even born. And so the target population in this case is literally inaccessible. And that's often the case for our research questions. The whole idea of science is to come up with general principles, general understanding of cause-effect relationships so that we can better control our environment. And those general understanding means that it's applicable over a broad group. So the target population is the group we have in mind when we ask a research question, and it's usually inaccessible or at best practically inaccessible. So in my example here, the target population would be beginning readers. Compare that to the accessible population. That's the group that we could envision studying if we had the resources. In practice, we seldom have the time or money to study the entire accessible population, but we can define some population that is accessible, that we would like to get to. Perhaps it is the beginning readers in a school district. If we get permission to go into the school district and do a study with beginning readers, chances are we're not going to have the time or resources to look at every beginning reader in the district. However, because the district gave us permission to do this, we could conceivably, with enough funding, with enough help, we could look at every beginning reader. But because we are not going to be able to do that with limited funding and limited help, we call this the accessible population, but it's not necessarily who's going to end up in our study. It's just who we have access to. If I wanted to do a research study at the university with undergraduate students, the University of South Carolina undergraduate population could be the accessible population. However, given the size of that population, very doubtful that I'm going to include them all in my study. Also, it's probably not likely that they're all willing to be part of the study. So the accessible population is the group we could envision studying if we had the resources and if we had the agreement of these individuals to participate in this study. So you see the difference of the target population who we want to answer a research question for, but a smaller population, often much, much smaller population, but still one that's too large to have access to. That's the accessible population. Before we leave the concept of population, I want to tell you about one special case, one certain type of study, and that's called program evaluation. The difference between evaluation and research is with program evaluation, the researchers are trying to answer a question about a specific program that is in operation for a specific population. So that's different because our question is restricted to a much smaller group. So in program evaluations, who we want to answer the question for are the people in the program. And guess what? Those people are also accessible. So this is the one exception, but it's really not, I don't consider this a research question that we're talking about. I consider it an evaluation question, but the two sound a lot alike. Research questions applied in a program setting to determine if that program is working in that setting is an evaluation question. So it's like a research question, except for a specific purpose of knowing whether the program is working. And in this case, the target and accessible populations are the same and are available to the researcher, and often they're all used in the research study. So just to keep in mind that there's an exception to the rule. The general idea is that target populations are inaccessible. Accessible populations are accessible, but we don't have the resources to look at everyone. But in program evaluation, both target and accessible population can be studied and are often the same. So that's it for talking about the population. Next, we're going to talk about the sample.